All right, so welcome everyone attending both here at the museum and over Zoom to our June Immerse Yourself. My name is Julia. I am the Community Relations Specialist here at the museum. So I do want to thank this month's sponsors, which are Horizon Divers and Iron Mike Museum member, retired Navy Admiral Kurt Tidd. So thank you to those two groups that are sponsoring our speaker tonight. I'm going to let you know about a couple of upcoming events in July. So in July on the 19th, which is Women's Dive Day, we're going to have our Women's Dive Day guided tours here at the museum. So they're included with your admission. If you are a member or if you just come in for the day and get a ticket, you'll have a tour included, complimentary. And that's going to be at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on July 19th. So come on in for Women's Dive Day, have some fun with us. Before that, on July 16th, we'll have July's Immerse Yourself. That's going to be with Don Liberator. He is a submersible pilot and engineer with over 1,700 dives and 5 different vehicles over a 34-year career. It's going to be pretty cool. His presentation will cover some of his submersible missions, how those vehicles were developed and operated, and how salvage down to 3,000 feet is performed. So again, that's going to be July 16th, Immerse Yourself. Now, speaking of underwater salvage, tonight's speaker that we were all here for, his name is Michael Carr. He is a retired U.S. military officer and U.S. Navy trained Ship Salvage Diving Officer, or SSDO. He will be taking us through 2 of his salvage operations that he was involved with, what kind of challenges he and the other divers faced. And without further ado, I'm going to let Michael take it away.
Julia, thank you very much for inviting me as well. I'm really glad to be here and be able to share with you 2 diving salvage operations I was involved in when I was in the Coast Guard as a diving officer. So add a little clarity to why I'm here. Is I spent 15 years in the Coast Guard, then got out of the Coast Guard and switched to the Army. That's a whole nother story. I was a Marine, a watercraft operator in the Army for 15 years. And then I was in the Coast Guard and talked to you about these 2 cases. One was the Air Florida crash of a Boeing jet in the Potomac River. And then the other one is a year after that, a coal ship sailing between Norfolk and Rhode Island sank off the coast of Virginia, and 30 plus sailors died in that incident. And what's interesting, and we'll see as I go through this slide, that casualty brought about a lot of changes in the marine world, regulation changes and safety changes that have improved the life of mariners since then. Seems like you always have to have some tragic accident to wake people up to make changes in society. And I have 2 short videos later on in here, which Julia will help me show. I showed up an hour early and we worked through it, but I can't do it on my own. Julia is going to come in and do that. All right, so but to get into these 2 salvage cases, the first thing I want to do is talk about Navy diving, so you'll understand what it takes to become a Navy diver and how that differs from being a civilian diver, a PADI diver, whatever, that emphasizes having fun and enjoying your dive. Navy dive school, it was not designed to be fun. And the courses are taught by Navy master divers and master chiefs that enjoy having people ring the bell and leave. I think they get the most joy out of flunking people out for the right reasons, because a lot of the training is to inoculate you against stress and also to teach you skills that you can apply when you're involved in a salvage case. And there are various levels of diver training. I don't have a pointer, but it goes everything from scuba diver up to master diver, and in the enlisted and officer ranks. And not only do you learn new skills at every level, but you learn leadership techniques, because not only do you have to be at a dive, but you have to be able to manage your divers and to get a salvage case done correctly. It's not just getting in the water and blowing bubbles, it's being able to understand what you're trying to do and accomplish it in a given amount of time. So it's pretty demanding training. I'm Fortunately, I graduated and made it out as a diving officer. Now, the first thing to tell you in Navy dive school is that diving is merely a method to get to your work site. So it's not about, looking at the fish or, having a good time holding on to the descent line or whatever. It's you get your butt from the boat down to your dive site and then accomplish the task that you've been given. And a salvage master will examine what needs to be done, and then he will assign divers to do a certain task. And as the diver, you need to get down to the dive site using the tools that you're given and accomplish that task in the given amount of time. So those of you who are divers, many of you are, there are decompression limits. So if you're going to 100 feet, you have 20 minutes to bottom time, and your job is to, put this bolt or patch into place. You have to do it in 20 minutes. You can't then go back to the surface and say, oh, my bad, I didn't get it done. I lost some bolts and I dropped the crescent wrench. It doesn't work. So in the military diving field, we do what's called dirt diving or mud diving, which is practicing that skill on the surface before you go down and timing yourself. So you might imagine you're in your garage at your house working on, doing some task. And then you get your wrench and you go to the kitchen sink and it's the wrong size wrench. You go back to the garage, you get another wrench, and you're back and forth and you run to Lowe's and you get something. And, that's the way you get it done many times. But in the diving world, once you leave the surface, you have to have all your tools with you, understand what motions you're going to use and accomplish that task. And then dive school, part of the training is to give you tasks to do to measure your ability to focus and to accomplish a certain task in a given amount of time. And one of the tasks that's timed that drives all candidates crazy is what's called the pipe square. And it's much bigger than this. It's pieces of pipe that make a square about this big. And you go down to the bottom, zero visibility. You have 3-fingered mitts on, all right? And then the top side, they lower down a canvas bag, and inside of it, in that canvas bag, are this pipe square all taken apart. So 4 elbows and 4 straight pieces of pipe. It's all in the bag. So you're down on the bottom. You can't see anything. It's muddy. And the topside supervisor will have a stopwatch. And they'll say, red diver topside, your project time has started. You have 20 minutes. Put the pipe square together. So you're down there and you're screwing this one into this. And you have to visualize it. And you have to count how many turns you make, because as you can see, the first 2 or 3 won't be that bad. But then you get to the end and you go, oh, I got to get the last elbow on. But if these haven't been, and then you have to screw it back out again, because once it's done and you say, oh, am I in the wrong? Oh, yeah, there you go, pipe square.
Yeah.
Once you get your pipe square done and you tell topside red diver, my pipe square is complete, and you can't even see it, so you're just going to hope it's together. They give you a line, you tie it on, they pull it up to the surface, and the master diver up there is going to check, and he's going to turn each one of these and see if they're all the same number of threads in, and it actually makes a real pipe square. And if it doesn't meet to their satisfaction, you don't pass. And you do it again. Or you do it 1 or 2 more times, and then you go home and you unpass it around. They send you back to yeoman school. So it's a pretty demanding, and the school I went through, the salvage officer class, it's about 5 months in length. And so every Monday through Friday for 5 months, you have tests every Friday, and then if you pass, you advance to the next. And the final exercise, which they still do, the dive school has moved in Anacostia in DC, but now down in Panama City, Florida. You salvage an actual sunken ship. So they have an old minesweeper that sunk and it's got holes in it, and you have to survey it and identify all the issues, put patches, rig pumps, pump it out, and it has to stay afloat for 24 hours. If it doesn't stay afloat for 24 hours, then you fail, and all the master divers, tell you to do it over again. It's a very satisfying training regime. By the time you graduate, you really feel you've mastered, or I wouldn't say mastered, you've begun to get an inkling as to what it takes to be a salvage diver. And I'm going to pass around a copy of the Navy diving manual, just so you can get a feel for the material, the depth of the knowledge that you have to embrace and understand. It's a lot of math. It's a lot of physics, understanding tools. So it's both a physical and a mental challenge. You have to really have. Now, to show you how it all comes together, after I was switched from the Coast Guard to the Army, I was the skipper of LCU's landing craft utility, which are 174-foot landing craft. And they're beautiful vessels. The Army didn't envision this when they were built, but they're beautiful vessels for conducting diving operations because they have a bow ramp they can lower down. And the Navy, see up here, there's a bow ramp, and the Navy built a ladder that fits onto the bow ramp there, and then the Navy will load all their gear onto the deck. And you can see here these different Connex boxes. And then we'll go out and go on a 3-point board because we had stern anchor and 2 bow anchors. And we'd go out and the Navy would train and do exercises and train their divers. This is an example off of Key West back in 2015. And it's the Underwater Construction Team 1, which is out of Norfolk, Virginia. So they brought all the gear to us. We were based out of North Carolina at the time. They put all their gear up, Connex boxes on there. We sailed down to Key West, and then they showed up, and we spent 2 weeks doing diving operations out of Key West. It's a job I love doing. And anytime the Navy wanted to do that, I was all for it. All right, so now giving that background into the salvage Navy military world, the first case I want to talk about is the Air Florida crash on the 13th of January, 1982 in the Potomac River. So at this time, I was in the Coast Guard as a diving officer. I was in charge of a dive team based out of Elizabeth City, North Carolina. It was a 13-man dive team, all Navy Coast Guardsmen, but all Navy trained. And we were tasked by the Coast Guard to pretty much go anywhere, anytime, do whatever needs to be done if it involves getting in the water. We had a lot of good equipment. We had pumps, welding equipment, cold water gear, surface supplied, scuba, and just a whole warehouse full of stuff. It was pretty exciting. So we got this plane took off from Washington National, and I know some of you are familiar with DC, but in case you're not, so there's National Airport right there. This is a runway going north, and the Air Florida flight took off up this runway, and it crashed. See the 4 bridges just north of there. It crashed between the 3rd and 4th bridge, and it just also is rough. Navy Dive School used to be over there at the Navy Yard in DC. And the helicopter and the Army Black Hawk and the commercial aircraft that collided recently crashed. They crashed right in this area here, which is, you can't see the depth soundings, but it's only about 4 feet deep right there. They crashed in very shallow water. When Air Florida crashed, you can see the white sounding area on the chart. It's about 20 feet there. So where the Air Florida plane went down, it was much deeper. You couldn't just get in there easily. So the plane took off, and I apologize for it's not as sharp. I pulled this off the internet. It's not as sharp as it could be, but you can see at the plane took off where the number 1 is. It started to gain altitude, but it lost lift because that wings had iced up. And these are the days when the de-icing equipment and some of the procedures that the pilots followed weren't appropriate. But anyway, it lost that elevation. It came crashing down. It hit the bridge, and the plane split in half. And at the time, the river was frozen. And I'm going to show you that in a second. Here, to give you a better sort of ground view of this, this is looking south on the Potomac River from the spot approximately where the plane finally landed. But this picture was taken in the summertime. I took this picture because at the time, I took this years later when I was in the Army, and Army had a watercraft unit out of Fort Belvoir, which is south on the Potomac River, and we used to sail the boats up to the Pentagon to do missions up there, and the Pentagon is just north of here. Pentagon has a little boat harbor there. And every time we sail by this spot, I would go, God damn! Oh, I'm live. I should. What the heck? I remember diving right here, 20 years prior when this is. So it's sort of funny how life, you find yourself back in places you thought you'd never be. But anyway, you can see how tight this is. And one of the difficulties in the salvage was that the boats that they needed to get in and the cranes and all couldn't get under these bridges. So it was a logistical challenge to get to the spot where the plane crashed in order to start doing diving operations. Now, the man in charge of coordinating all the activity for the salvage was Commander Delaplane, who was the CO of what at the time was called a harbor clearance unit. There are Navy units designed to go and clear harbors in wartime or anytime so Navy ships can get in and out. They're now called mobile diving and salvage units because they're very mobile. They can go anywhere in the world. I wanted him to be in this presentation because he was a ship salvage diving officer. He was technically extremely smart. He had a grasp of physics and engineering that was unbelievable. But he was a terrific leader of people. He knew how to manage people properly, which is, I think, as important as knowing the engineering aspect. And he also understood the stress that was going on by the families of the victims on the airplane. And he realized that the families didn't understand really when they would get the bodies back, because everyone on the plane died. 4 people got out, but see in a second, most of the people died. So we had to recover the bodies and recover the airplane and recover the black boxes. And it would be easy to neglect the emotional end of this. But he said, there's this pressure of we want our loved ones back. So what he did was he spent the daytime working on getting the plane out of the river and hauling the pieces of the plane up. So it was in daylight and it was very visible. People could see it coming out of the water and go, okay, they're recovering the plane. But all the nighttime operations, when you couldn't see anything, is when we recovered all the bodies. So we'd dive at night, recover the bodies. Then once it got daylight, recover the plane. And that way there was some compassion for the families. There weren't photographers taking pictures of people being brought out of the water, frozen, dead in their seats in the daytime. And I thought, this guy is really smart. And I had the privilege of working with Commander Delaplane on another very prominent marine salvage operation, the Coast Guard cutter that sank in Tampa Bay. The Coast Guard cutter Blackthorn collided with the inbound ship, the Capricorn, and we had to pull all the bodies out of the Blackthorn. And we did the same thing on that job. We recovered the bodies when there wasn't a lot of visibility, and salvaged the ship when people could see it. It was that same case that caused the Sunshine, for those of you history buffs, the Sunshine Skyway Bridge was hit by a ship as a result of the fact that the channel going into Tampa had to be changed to accommodate the salvage of the Blackthorn, and a rain squall occurred when the ship was coming in, and that detoured channel was very close to the piling of the Sunshine Bridge. And so when the ship coming in lost visibility and hit it, it was because of what had happened earlier. And I was still down there, and we're all working on salvaging the remaining anchor chain and parts of the Blackthorn. And then we hear this big crash, boom, and we look over and we see the Sunshine Skyway Bridge collapsing, and we're going. And I remember one of the Army divers standing next to me said something like, well, we're going to be here another goddamn month now because we got to go down there. Which is sort of gallows humor, because people did die, but we had been down there for several months, and we thought, we're finally going to leave, but going to stay here. do some more. And that's the nature of salvage work. It's just, there is no beginning and end that you can often define. You just start the project and you work it through till you get done. All right, so back to the Air Florida. So you can see this ice on the water there, Army LCM in the background. And at the time, we were diving scuba and surface supplied. I'm going to talk to some of the surface supplied equipment we used, but a lot of the initial survey was done in scuba. And the Army Corps of Engineers said, so this is years before GPS and all the fancy geolocation equipment we have now. The Army Corps of Engineers set up transits. And when we would find something, we would mark it with a float, and the Army Corps of Engineers would transect it and say, oh, this is where, from our bubbles coming up and from the float that we would put up, this is where the nose is, and this is where a wing is. And then that way they could map out where the parts were, because the river, the visibility was, as it says in here, be to 8 inches. I made several dives on this site, and then I got called off to go to do something else. But the dives I made, you get down there and you're just feeling around and touching things. And sometimes it's easier to just close your eyes, because if you leave your eyes open, you're straining to see something, you're never going to see it. It's just easier to close your eyes and just feel. One of the dangers was that the water is so cold and the aluminum fuselage is so sharp that if you cut yourself, you wouldn't even feel it. It's like, you numb yourself with ice and then you cut it, you don't feel it. So you had to be really careful about all the aluminum that was from the broken fuselage. But most of the people that died in the crash were still in their seats, because we're still on takeoff. They had their belts on. So you'd find a seat and there'd be a person in it, and you'd mark it. And then at nighttime, you'd bring up the whole contraption. There was a lot of divers. It says here, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, and Coast Guard units. And what made the operation go so smoothly is that everyone had gone through the same training. So you didn't have any workup time to go, well, how do you do it? Or how do you do it? We all use the same surface supplied equipment. We all use the same scuba. All you had to do was go, this is your mission, and boom, boom, boom. So that was the beauty of that, is the seamlessness of everyone just coming together and making it happen. All right, so let me go to the next slide. Now I want to talk about dive equipment a little bit, because it's over the years, it's really evolved. So we now have regulators made by Apex, Dive Right, U.S. Divers, as well as Scuba Pro. I probably left some out. And the pick and the number of models and the varieties, you go in a dive shop now and you go, oh my God, which one? Oh, you need this one, you need that one. Back then, the dark ages of the 80s, the only thing that existed that worked flawlessly all the time was the U.S. Divers Aqualung Conch Shell 14. That thing never failed. It's a diaphragm first stage, which if it has a problem, it will always free flow. It won't stop breathing. And the second stage is this free flow second stage, which if it gets grit or dirt in it, it won't stop. It'll just start feeding you air. And it's a heavy brass first stage. And you can drop it on the ground and bang it around. Not that you try to do that. But the other thing that was a beauty about this regulator is that in here, there's a diaphragm. And then you can see a little slot. I'm going to pass this around. When you're diving with it and you need to, oh, sorry, gotta get back in the.
No, show the people on.
Oh yeah, so this Conch Shell 14. There's a slot in here, and you can take a screwdriver, and if you turn it clockwise, it increases the pressure to the second stage. If you back it off, it decreases it. So if you're diving at depth and you need to increase the over bottom pressure to make sure you got enough pressure going to second, you can put a pressure gauge in the port, in the high pressure, low pressure port, and adjust this to use from the low pressure port. See, it's the proper 135 PSI or whatever you want, and done. You're ready to go. So it's a very simplistic, but very reliable piece of equipment. And just this past year, I still dive Concho 14. I got like 6 of these in my garage. But this past year, U.S. divers stopped making them. It's like very sad. And the Navy went crazy. They go, oh my God, you can't do that. So U.S. divers said, okay, we'll keep making parts for it, but we're not going to make the regulator anymore, which is, that's fine. We have to move on. But it's in the cycle of life, it's really sort of sad to see this piece of equipment no longer available. All right. Now, that was for scuba. Then we also had the Mark 12 surface applied system, which is no longer used, but I want to talk about it a little bit. And the Kirby Morgan Superlight, which looks similar to this Kirby Morgan band mask. The Mark 12 system, which you see on the left there, was the replacement for the Navy's Mark 5, the big brass helmet. So the Navy in the 70s said, we got to get rid of the brass helmet. They started designing a new system. And they came up with the Mark 12, which was sat on your head, had a breastplate here. It sat down with pins in it that held it in. It was a free flow system, meaning it had to have a constant flow of air going to it, but they had designed it so it didn't require the cubic feet per minute that a Mark 5, the Mark 5 had a lot of space inside of there. It was a lot of volume. They had a lot of air going through there to make sure that you didn't get a CO2 buildup, also to ventilate it. And because that was a workhorse of a unit, you'd sweat your little butt off when you were working. So there's a lot of humidity in there. You have to have a lot of airflow. So they came over the Mark 12, and I dove it a lot until they got rid of it like 3 years in. And I'll tell you why in a second. It was a beautiful rig. It was comfortable, a lot of visibility. It had foam on the inside. It was very quiet. It moved easily. They designed coveralls to go over the outside with pockets, so all your weights were from your waist down. They didn't have the big weight belts that you had on the Mark 5, which were often very cumbersome. And it had weighted boots, and you could get in there, and it was like, this is a terrific system. The problem with it was it had too many moving parts. And one of the big downfalls, and you might be able to see it right here. I remember this because it was a big issue. Right on the side of the helmet, you see a little detent ring. It's like a pin. So you have the helmet, you put the neck dam on, the helmet would come down, you put those 2 pins in. Well, at the end of that pin was these 2 detent balls. You know, it's supposed to pop out once it's through the holding mechanism. But what would happen is dirt and grime and salt and all that other stuff in the real world would get in those detent rings, and then you'd lean over like this, and the pins would fall out, which would then like cause the helmet to want to, go towards the surface. So the Navy modified it for a while. They put some other pins in there, but now here you are in a salvage job, nighttime, dirty, dark. You're trying to get work done, and you got this handful of stuff that you gotta, put in that helmet to make it work. So they said this isn't gonna work. The other issue that came along was that you had to have a constant flow of air going in that helmet, and if you're at a mobile dive site, you're gonna have to have a compressor going all the time and have bottles going all the time. So the Navy then looked at the Kirby Morgan helmets, which have a demand regulator on the front, but it's a heavy duty demand regulator that will give you all the air you need. And so the Navy then went to Kirby Morgan and said, build us one of these helmets that's to mil spec. We have a lot of other stuff we want to do with it. And the Navy switched to that. And they now have this is an early version, it's a KMB band mask, so there's no helmet on it, but it's the same concept. So yeah. So here's let's say this is a Kirby Morgan mask. So you got air coming in back in this manifold. If you turn this valve, turn it counterclockwise, it blows air through a tube on the front here with little holes in it, and it'll clear all the fog out, right? It's really amazing. And then it also has on this side what they call a dial of breath, which is you can adjust the breathing resistance on the second stage. So if you're working really hard, you often are, and you're it's getting fogged up and you're huffing and puffing, you turn the dial of breath, loosen it up a little, you get it now, the air just comes to you without even having to think about it. You turn this one, it'll clear and ventilate, so you can keep working, and everything's good. You don't start to feel deprived of air. And I know for you, those of you who are scuba divers, you know, you're down on the Spiegel Grove trying to swim back to the descent line against the current. It's happened to me, and you're going, oh, Jesus. And you're kicking like this, and you can feel that oxygen get building up. So it's these were great helmets, and they're even better now. All right, so sorry, Julia, don't mean to keep. So there's the Mark 12 again, just to give you another view of it. Had good visibility, a lot of air, had those coveralls. The coveralls come in different sizes, so the 4 is designating that size. So once you find the size you want, then every time you shoot up, you don't have to be rummaging around. You know, I wear size 4, and then you put all the weights in the legs. It has weighted boots, and it has a exterior harness that goes on you that holds the helmet in place and holds the umbilicals. It's a very comfortable rig. A lot of thought went into it. I hear a question. Okay, so this is the Kirby Morgan, which it originally called the Superlight 17. Now they're up to like the Superlight 37. The shell is almost indestructible, so you can bang anything into it. You won't. There's foam inside of there. It's got the dial of breath. It's got the free flow. It also has a come home bottle, which plugs into here, which is a scuba tank on your back, that if you lose air from the surface, you just turn on, you open this valve right there, and that's the ability, this is the come home. You open it up, and then you can breathe off that scuba tank to either reestablish air from the surface, or you just make your direct ascent. A bailout, yeah. All right, so here's some views of the Air Florida crash. You can see this is during the daytime, and some of the images are, you know, they're one of these images that everyone remembers. And bringing the tail up was a big deal. Commander Delaplane made sure everyone knew that we were going to bring the tail up at a certain time. We rigged it at night. It's all rigged. It was ready to go. We did a couple of test lifts on it. Yep, it's going to come up. And then, you know, 10 o'clock the next morning when everyone was there to see it, he had him bring it up. And it was very satisfying for the people wondering, you know, when something is going to happen. So it was good. It diffused a lot of the tension of, and you can see behind the tail in the right picture how close you were to the shore. I mean, that's right on the edge of the Potomac River. So people were there all the time watching what's going on. And here's the cockpit coming up, and then on the right there's ice and other parts of the fuselage coming up. The Navy has a magazine called Faceplate, which they used to publish in paper, and you could subscribe to it, but you can get it online. And if you're interested in Navy diving operations and salvage, it's wonderful reading. It comes out every couple of months. You can Google Faceplate magazine. It's free. Shows all the different operations the Navy does worldwide, solving all kinds of problems, and assisting in civilian, not only military, but civilian operations where you need that expertise. All right, so before I move on, that was Air Florida, and it was very challenging, but we found the black boxes. We recovered all of the passengers and the crew that died, and recovered like 99% of the airplane, so that FAA or the NTSB could put it back together and figure out what happened. All right. So the next accident, they all seem to happen in, you know, they don't all, but many of them happen in the wintertime, you know. We always sit around the warehouse going, okay, it's December, it's gonna start, you know, pretty soon planes are gonna fall out of the sky, and ships are gonna get in storms. So this is the Marine Electric. It's a coal ship. Originally, it wasn't a coal ship. It went through iterations. It was built in World War II, carried oil, carried grain, carried different commodities, was sold numerous times. It was an old ship, right? Built in 1944, not intended to last very long. It was lengthened from 523 feet to 605 feet to carry more commodities. Slow speed of 15 knots, dropped to 34 feet. So it departed Norfolk, Virginia, loaded with coal, 24,000 tons of coal, bound for Rhode Island in February of 1983. This was a route that they ran all the time. They had Norfolk to Rhode Island. They're taking coal up to a power plant up there, and they run up, offload the coal, come back and forth, back and forth. Same thing. Pretty standard run. And so they left Cape Charles down here out of Norfolk and headed north, you know, northeast towards Rhode Island. And that's the approximate position that the vessel sank, which we'll get into in a second, not too far offshore, but in about 130 feet of water. Now, what caused the vessel to sink is what's sort of fascinating. Move on. All right. Yeah, well, let me talk about the people that died. So 31 crewmen died. It sank, it broke apart, it sank, and there were 3 survivors, right? Huge tragedy. And the ones that died, it was from hypothermia, water's freezing cold, and I'm going to show you the weather in a second. The ship sank because the hatch covers were corroded through. It was in really bad material shape. There was rust everywhere. The hatch covers were falling apart. The hatches in those days had wedges that went along the side that would hold tarps over top and keep the tops, the covers in place. And a lot of those fasteners were rusted through and wouldn't work. So many of the hatch covers only had, like having only 2 nuts on your wheel instead of 5 nuts. But the ABS, American Bureau of Shipping, and the Coast Guard inspections at the time didn't hold the company responsible. The company would say, oh, we're going to fix it in the next shipyard period. It's economically infeasible for us to take it in the shipyard. We're going to lose money. We can't do it. And so the ship was running when it really shouldn't have been. And it got into bad weather, started taking seas over the bow, which flooded the forward part of the ship. And the ship just started going down by the bow. And then pretty quickly, if you know ship stability, ships don't sink slowly. They float, they float, they float, they float, and then they sink. Because you have a certain amount of reserve buoyancy. And when you hit the point at which you go, it's not a gray area. It's a line, a very distinct line. Either you have enough buoyancy to stay afloat or you don't. So if you see movies sometimes where it's so slowly sinking, but reality, it gets to a point where it just goes. And this is what happened. The ship had coal, so it was heavy to begin with, not a lot of reserve buoyancy. So anyway, it flooded by the bow. It started going down, and then it rolled over and it sank. And they couldn't launch the lifeboats. The lifeboats are the old style, like Titanic style lifeboats. You can only lower them when the ship is level, right? You ever see a ship leaning over trying to lower lifeboats? One set of lifeboats is pressed against the hull, the other's way out there in La La Land. You can't get in it. So lifeboats it's a misnomer, because the only time a lifeboat will work for you if it's flat, calm, and there's no stress, and you can easily lower them. Right. So here's the weather on the days that the vessel went out and sank. It was 37 degree air temperature, 39 degrees sea temperature, east-northeast winds 25 to 35 knots, seas 15 to 20, 20 to 25 feet. I've been in some bad weather. I know some of you have been out on boats in bad weather, but when I was in the Coast Guard, I was on a buoy tender up in Alaska for 2 years before I went to dive school. We used to do patrols out in the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea in the wintertime. dear God, that will bring you to your knees and make you pray for, I'm going to go join the Air Force. I don't want to do this anymore. It's rough. It tires you out. It's not that it's necessarily the roughness, but it wears your body out because you're constantly working to stay upright and to do things, and it just, human beings can't operate in that for very long. So once the ship filled with water and sank, going out to the rescue them was either had to be done right away, and the resources to get out there. Now, if you look at this hypothermia, and this is look over here, 40 to 50 degree water temperature, you know, a third one down, you're gonna be unconscious within a half an hour to an hour. And then you're gonna expected survival time 1 to 3 hours. And that it really happens, your body just, it shuts down. I'm gonna go off on a short tangent here. I used to work, when I retired from the Army and the Coast Guard, I worked with a man named Mario Bertoni. He's a retired Coast Guard rescue swimmer. We're gonna talk about them in a second too. And he developed this program to train ship pilots, the guys that go out and bring the ships in, to train them on how to handle being in the water if they fell off the pilot boat or fell off the ladder when they were climbing up. And Mario, he's a crazy dude. He would go to these pilot organizations in the middle of the winter and then go jump in the freezing cold water to show them what it was like. So I remember going with him once up to Norfolk, and the water was like in the 40s, and you know, Mario says, okay, I'm gonna, and he would tell them what was gonna happen. I'm gonna jump in and it's gonna knock the breath out of me, and I'm gonna, you know, start doing this and huffing and puffing, and he'd say this, you know, this is how you calm yourself down, and this is how to, but he said, this is how, I want you to see what happens to your body, because I can talk about it all day, but it doesn't make an impression necessarily. So I was his backup. He said, Michael, if I, you know, something bad happens, you got to come in and get me. It's like, oh dear God, how did I volunteer? I never had to do that, but he would then get out of the water and show the proper procedure for how to wrap someone up, get them out of their wet clothes, and how to put them in a space blanket and a sleeping bag to stabilize them so that pilots would know how to do that. It was a great course. I really enjoyed working with Mario, and he knew this because he had been a Coast Guard rescue swimmer and knew what would happen in cold water. I can't overemphasize, cold water will kill you in a heartbeat. I used to teach what's now called basic safety training, which is a result of this accident. And one of the demonstrations I would do is get a bucket of ice water in the classroom, bucket of ice water, and put some coins in the bottom, and then tell one of the students to put your hand in there for 5 minutes or so, and then try and pick up the coins. And you can't do it because within five or so minutes, your hand is numb and you can't. So I said, how are you going to have any dexterity to do anything? And to really demonstrate people how serious that is. And down here it talks about of the 3 survivors, what they were wearing. Unfortunately, they had a lot of clothing on, which probably helped mitigate some of the hypothermia. And one of them was able to get into a lifeboat and was finally rescued being in the lifeboat because he got out of the water. Water takes heat out of your body 25 times faster than air. People always think, oh, you go to the beach on a windy day and you're in the water and you feel pretty good, and then you get out, you go, oh, it's so cold out of the water, I'll stay back in the water. But what's happening when you get out, it feels cold at first because the water is evaporating from the wind, evaporating the water off your body. But as soon as you're dry, you go, oh, I feel great now. So you can't, if you want to stay warm, you got to get out of the water. Or be properly clothed for the conditions. But that's what these guys died of, is exposure. Now, one other little tangent here, which I think you'll find interesting, is that ships can have lifeboats or life rafts, and if you're on a pleasure boat, often they have inflatable life rafts. And inflatable life rafts all have when they pop open and inflate, they all have these rope ladders that hang down, and different styles, but it's the same thing. So the rope ladder's hanging down, and in the manual it says, to get in the life raft, put your feet on the rungs of the rope ladder and climb in. Now, think about this. The ladder is hanging in the water. So I go put my foot in it and push. Where do you think the rope ladder is going to go? It just flips right up underneath the life raft. It does you no freaking good. If anything, it tangles your foot. Now your foot's tangled, and you're hanging with one foot under it. It doesn't work. The only way you can get in a life raft is to reach up, and there's a line inside the raft on the inside of the tube that you can grab. And there's also a line sometimes stretching from two entrances. And you have to get up there and grab that rope and then physically pull yourself up and over. And if you have a life jacket on in front of you, it's even more difficult. So when I used to teach this, and part of it, it's required by the Coast Guard to demonstrate the ability to get in a life raft. And a lot of people don't have the necessary upper body strength to get in. And there were some mariners that, you know, had been going to sea for a long time, great guys, but they were overweight and didn't have the strength and would get in the pool and they couldn't get in the life raft. You know, I'd say to them, you gotta work on this, because if the time comes you gotta get in this raft, you're gonna die hanging on this side. So just realize that the real world in so many cases is far different than, oh, I see the manual, climb up in this little rope ladder, we'll get into it. No, it doesn't work. All right, so, all right, now, we were, so I was on the dive team in North Carolina. The coal ship sinks, call goes out, distress call, everyone's scrambling, the Naval Air Station in Norfolk scrambling, we're scrambling, but it's a snowstorm, the weather is awful, and at the time, the Coast Guard had two types of helicopters, a single engine, designated HH-52 Alpha, and then a twin engine, Sikorsky twin engine, HH-3 Foxtrot. The bigger one, the twin engine one, is based out of Elizabeth City where we are, and the smaller ones, less capable at other air stations. So there was a smaller helicopter located up in Cape May that could have gone out if the weather had been better, but the weather was too much for that small of a helicopter. So they said, well, we're going to send the HH-3F from Elizabeth City, but the weather was just marginal. I mean, no one in his right mind would, you know, go outside their front door with what was going on. But the Coast Guard said, okay, we'll send someone. But at the time, the Coast Guard did not have rescue swimmers, right? Ever seen the movie The Guardian, you know, with the rescue swimmer? Yeah. Well, the rescue swimmers didn't exist because at the time, the Coast Guard didn't feel a need for it. The Navy had rescue swimmers because the Navy has jet planes that launch off of aircraft carriers, and the Navy had rescue swimmers so that if a jet ditched, couldn't land, whatever, the helicopter from the aircraft carrier would go pick them up. So that the Navy understood the need for someone to get in the water and recover a pilot. But the Coast Guard only has helicopters. So what the Coast Guard was doing to rescue people would have the basket, you know, lower the basket down, person gets in the basket, you raise them back up, piece of cake. The Coast Guard also, that two helicopters they had at the time were amphibious helicopters. Supposedly they could land on the water. Another terrifying thought, because when it lands on the water, you got these big blades swirling around. If it's flat calm, okay, this is good, let's get back in the air. But if there's any kind of seaway, those blades can hit the water. And several times when I was on the dive team, we went out and salvaged Coast Guard helicopters that had lost, not because they landed in the water, they had auto-rotated and then come down. They lost an engine, so they just put down in the water. And they have, the helicopters have bags that inflate. They're supposedly going to keep them upright. It doesn't work. It sits there doing this for a while. I think I'd rather be upside down. And so they just flip over because there's too much weight up, and the blades droop and they catch in the waves and they just trip. So there were many, many times we'd go out and sit on the bottom of a overturned Coast Guard helicopter waiting for a Navy ship to come and lift it up out of the water, which, you know, was great entertainment. But anyway, the Coast Guard was struggling on how to rescue these guys because we didn't have, they were all in the water. You could see them down there, but they couldn't tell if they were dead or what, but we had no way of getting to them. So the Navy said, well, we'll go out. And the Navy did go out with rescue swimmers and tried to save them. But most of them, by the time the Navy got out there, had already perished. Right? And they just floating, and then they were dead, except for the 3 that they finally did rescue. But when we went out there, so then we went out several days later, storm had passed. Now the ship is sunk, but we got to locate it. No one really knows where it is. And the families want to know, well, maybe people are trapped inside of it, you know? And though the chance of that is very slim, you can't say to the families, oh, no, there's no way, they're all dead. You got to say, roger that. We're going to go out, we're going to pound on the hull, we're going to do what we can, because, you know, maybe I'm not the one there are people trapped inside. So we go out there, and the Coast Guard is located where they think the ship is, because now there's oil spills on the surface and debris. And so we're heading out there, and there's a Coast Guard buoy tender on the right there. And it's sitting out there, not moving. And we're coming out on that 82-foot patrol boat you see on the left. And we get out to the buoy tender, and the skipper says, boy, I'm really glad you guys are here. I found the ship because I know I found it because I've got one of its mooring lines tangled in my prop, and I can't go anywhere. Right? And that was because the Marine Electric, because it made the same run back and forth back, they had spliced all their mooring lines in place, right? Because they tied up the same place in Norfolk, same place in Rhode Island. And they used this, I still remember it to this day, black and yellow, big polypropylene line because it floats, right? So it's cheap, it's inexpensive, it floats, whatever. So when the ship sank, all those mooring lines that were spliced to the cleats, they all just floated like spaghetti up to the surface. So they were all just like sitting with the ends up at 100, it was down at 130 feet, but the ends of them were up at the surface. And the Madrona, the buoy tender, had sailed in there looking and sucked one of them up. So it was pretty funny. So I said, okay, good, we know where the ship is. First thing we did was we untangled, we cut the mooring line out of the Madrona, and then we dove down. I made the first dive. I remember this. We dove down the mooring line. We just hand over hand on this big black and yellow. But here's the thing where Navy dive school comes through. We dive in the civilian world, and I brought this to remind me. We have these nice little placards, it shows us where we're going and where the buoys are tacked. And that's where you go, I'm going to go down the number 6 float. We'll go here. And it's very low stress because you know what you're going to see and where you're going to go. But all the dive jobs we did in the military, none of them had a little like, oh, here's what you're going to see, right? And so we're going down this line, and it's ship's at 130 feet. So and we didn't have night trucks; it's just all air back then. So you're very cognizant of the fact that I got limited bottom time. I got to get my ass down there, figure this out. Do it, get the job done. So, getting down there. So we got down, and I remember that the ship started appearing out of the haze there, and it was only about 10 foot of visibility. But the line is going right to the gunnel, and the ship is sitting at an angle, and between the gunnel and the bottom is about 4 feet, and there's this current flowing. And so the current and the Venturi effect, or you tighten something up and the speed goes up. So I'm in my mind going, oh, look, there's the gunnel. And then I felt this tug like wanting to sweep me underneath the gunnel, up underneath the ship. I think I have a diagram of this. This is one of these. All right, so you can see, this is a diagram how it's sitting on the bottom. It's heeled over, there's this gap, and it's even not quite as pronounced back then. But we came down, so we ended up right about there, and I'm kicking like bejesus because all I can see is, oh, damn it, I'm going to get sucked underneath here, and they'll never find my body, and it's all done. So luckily, thank God for aqualung rocket fins and kicking my bejesus off, and we got up on the hull, and then we started swimming the hull tap and ran a crescent wrench or something. we tap, 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 and you know, it's like if there's someone alive in here, I don't know how they're going to signal back. But I said, we have to show due diligence because we have to be able to save the families. We found the ship, we pounded on the hull. I didn't get a response. That's all, you know, I did what we could do. And we're diving scuba, so then 10, 15 minutes of bottom time. So we did that. And then later on, civilian divers came out, did a more thorough inspection and side scan sonar. But we did get out there and get on the vessel and determine that. So it was kind of exciting. And I want to back up a second because there was another part of this story. When we first got wind that or were told that the ship had sunk, we wanted to go out there in one of the H3s from Elizabeth City and try and do something to help because the Coast Guard didn't have rescue swimmers. So at the time I was a lieutenant, and my next up the chain of command is Lieutenant Commander, who's also a diving officer. And I said to him, we need to go. And I remember this, we're standing in the ops center at the air station. And he said, Michael, we're not trained for this. And I said to him, we got to go. It doesn't matter we're not trained. We're Navy divers. We know how to improvise. We can't just sit here and go, I don't want to say to someone, well, I'm not trained for that, so I can't do it. The whole attitude in the military, in diving field and other fields is improvise, adapt, overcome, get the job done, use your brain. All right. Don't think up reasons why you can't do it. Figure out ways you can. So we had this very animated conversation, which probably on my half, other than a lieutenant and didn't know better, was I should have backed down sooner. But I remember this like, oh yeah, I'm not going to win this conversation. So, but you know, that's the inner workings of sometimes. You see the movies where it all just happens. Everyone yells, "Okay, Hondo, let's go." But there's often a lot of give and take and a lot of, you know, sharing your real feelings and understanding what your limitations are. And my senior officer was probably right. It's probably like, we're not qualified, but from my viewpoint, it was like, we got to do something. We at least get in a helicopter and make a try. All right. So as a result of that sinking, a journalist, Robert Frump, investigated this case because the Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board investigated, which they always do, to determine the cause of the sinking and how to prevent it from happening again. And Robert Frump went to the Coast Guard hearings, and he found out there was a lot of stuff that shouldn't have happened. The failed inspections, the lack of transparency, and the fact that the shipping company tried to blame the skipper, tried to blame anyone they could find for the ship sinking instead of taking responsibility. They even went as far as to try and blame the chief mate for falsifying his reports that said that hatch covers were delaminated and failing. And, you know, when it comes down to that kind of contentious legal, you know, you got to be prepared. And so,
for the architect for lengthening it.
And the lengthening of it. So you have a ship that was never designed, thank you, never designed for that trade. It wasn't built for coal originally. You know, accumulation of little things. And if you study accidents, you'll see from the shuttle accidents to diving accidents to ship, it's never, I shouldn't say that, it's rarely one thing that went wrong. It's an accumulation of little things that anywhere along the line you should say, whoa, time out. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or this isn't right, or I don't fit. There was a speaker last month from Dan. I watched the video of it, and he said something that really, like, I'm sitting by myself and I'm going, yeah, exactly right. He said that he never dives if three or more, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, if three or more things don't seem right, he says, all right, time out. And he never dives with like more than one piece of new equipment. Oh, I got a new BC. Oh, I got a new scooter. I got a new camera. Let's do it all at once. Because one thing goes wrong, another thing goes wrong. You're focusing on the camera instead of paying attention to your buoyancy, and then you wonder why you get an air embolism. So, you know, you got to force yourself into the thinking about it rationally, and taking it in small steps. So the NTSB did an investigation. I'm just going to read you that. I know it's a lot of words. I'm not supposed to put a lot of words on PowerPoint, but I just had to do this. So Bob Cusick, who was a captain in the Merchant Marine, and he survived the wreck. He was and I'm just going to read it down here because this is what Mr. Frump said. Bob Cusick was a brave and humble everyman hero who spoke up at a time when he easily could have remained silent, said Mr. Frump. His testimony was crucial to ending a bad system that sent dozens of old and unsafe ships out to sea and seamen to their deaths. Because Bob Cusick went and testified at the Coast Guard hearings. So he was one of the survivors of the sinking. And he adamantly spoke about the deficiencies and the problems and exposed the ABS, American Bureau of Shipping, and the Coast Guard for not doing their job, which sometimes people say, oh, it's easy to do the right thing, but it's not, in my opinion. It's often very difficult to do the right thing, especially if bureaucracies in society are telling you that your paycheck depends on doing the wrong thing, right? But Bob Cusick, an amazing man, and I know Bob Frump, and I've talked to him a lot, and he is a great journalist, and without his investigative journalism, we would never know some of this. Now, what happened was the Coast Guard did a report, and the Commandant of the Coast Guard at the time did not want to publish it. He said, oh, this is bad juju. We don't want the world to know our dirty laundry. So the Commandant wasn't going to publish it. We'll just keep this internal. We don't need to tell everyone about it. And Captain Lawrenson, who was the head of the investigation, said, you either publish it or I'm going to send it to the New York Times or the Washington Post, because this has got to we got to change. And so Captain Lawrenson put his career on the line, say, this is wrong. So it did get published, and it brought about huge changes. One was the Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer Program began. After that report came out and everyone realized that we weren't able to rescue those people, we started the Rescue Swimmer Program, and along came The Guardian, movies about it. But it was good. The Coast Guard now has this Rescue Swimmer Program that is the creme de la creme. The guys and gals that go through that are amazing. They can jump out of helicopters in the middle of god-awful storms and rescue people. And it's a testament to the Coast Guard finally opening their eyes. Also, immersion suits are required on ships now. And Julia's got to help me in this. Oh, I've gone over. Is it all right?
Yep.
Can I keep going?
Yep.
Keep going.
So immersion suits are now required, which protect you from cold weather. I'm going to do more on that in a second. They weren't required before. You just get in the water and die of freezing. Basic safety and survival training is required. Now all mariners have to take a week-long course in how to survive in a life raft, in an emergency, how to survive if your ship sinks, which they never had before. Right? And so it's a week-long, hands-on, get in the water, inflate a life raft, put an immersion suit on. It's a real deal. I used to teach that course, and I used to always say at the beginning of every class, I said, this course is a result of the Marine Electric sinking. It's a direct result. And guess what? I dove on the Marine Electric. I was there when those guys died. So it means a lot to me, and I'm really glad to be here teaching it to you. So I thought, who would have known?
Don't press it.
Say again?
Oh, don't press it quite yet.
Oh, okay. And then one more, the changes to the Coast Guard and ABS shipping inspections were corrected so that now you can't just rubber stamp if there's something wrong with that ship, it's got to get fixed. And you can't succumb to the pressure that shipping companies often want you to it's economic hardship, we'll go out of business and stockholders will be upset. You can't succumb to that anymore. It's broken, you got to fix it. And you can't leave port till it's fixed, all right, which is the big incentive. You want to sail, fix it. All right, now, with Julia's help, I'm going to show you 2 short little videos, and
Today we are at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, and on 12 February 1983, just 30 miles to the northeast of us, the SS Marine Electric, a 605-foot coal ship, sank in a February storm. 31 of the 34 crew members died from hypothermia and drowning. Because of that, we now have immersion suits required by the Coast Guard as a direct result of the investigation after that accident. So today, we're going to demonstrate how to properly don an immersion suit, how to enter the water. We're going to enter the Chesapeake Bay where the water temperature is in the 40s today, and demonstrate how to survive. So, I'm now going to take the immersion suit out of the bag and demonstrate how to put it on, and then we're going to go into the water. First, before I take it out of the bag, I'm going to make sure I have some other needed gear with me that I'm going to take when I abandon ship. The first is a hat to cover your head. You lose a tremendous amount of heat out of your head. Even though the immersion suit has a hood, we want to add extra thermal protection. So always have a watch cap, right? Put it on first. Make sure you have maybe a spare watch cap as well. Put it in your pocket. Maybe your shipmate doesn't have one. You want to share it. Put that in a pocket. Make sure you have a set of gloves. Once you get in a life raft or a lifeboat, you need hand protection if your hands are outside the immersion suit. So take a pair of gloves. If you have a tool like a Leatherman or a Gerber, you might need this. So take that as well. Make sure it's on you. If it's not in an accessible location, take it off your belt. We can show you some places to keep it on the suit. You want to have maybe a VHF radio with you. Take that. If you have an EPIRB on your life vest, take that as well. Water. Take extra water. All of these things will fit in the suit, and you'll see as we put on the suit that you can store them. You might also want to take some sort of strap so you can tie yourself to one of your shipmates, tie yourself to the life raft if you can't get in. Easy to take with you. Have all this gear ready to go. Before I get in the suit, I want to take off any type of life jacket, life preserver I may have had on. So maybe I was working on deck before this emergency. I had this inflatable PFD on. I'm not going to take it off. I will remove the EPIRB and take it with me. For now, I'm just going to set it aside. Now I'm going to take the suit out of the bag. All right? The way to do it is you grab the handle, give it a jerk. It falls out on deck. You're going to save this bag because it's where you're going to put all this extra gear. So here's my bag. I'm going to put my water in here, put my strap in here.
Rubber is an inflatable, you see the inflatable pillow? It does two things. It keeps your head up so you don't get every wave that comes along, and it insulates the base of your neck and the top of your spine from cold water. Even though the suit's still there, you lose a tremendous amount of heat out of the back of your neck area because that's where a lot of blood vessels come to the surface. And in the diving world, if you have done a deep dive in cold water and you've maybe not pushed, but you're near the edge of your no decompression limits, and you say, oh, I'm going to take a hot shower. What do you always do when you get in the shower to warm up? You always back up to the hot water. Oh, man. But you don't want to do that because what it does is it speeds up the blood flow, it speeds up nitrogen degassing, and then you get a Ben's head. So it's always said to warm up slowly in cold conditions. Don't put your back up onto the water. The other part about this is that it's got reflective pads on it. So at nighttime, those white little things are reflective pads. If you have clothing on and you're in that suit, you can stay alive for days. There have been fishermen in Alaska who've been picked up 3-4 days after their fishing vessel sank, still floating and alive in the immersion suit. And if you put stuff in there, so there's a waterproof zipper. If you put water, you can unzip it while you're lying on your back, pull out the water, pull out the radio, save me. And I kept the life jacket with me because to be found, if you're searching for someone, you want to look bigger, brighter, and different from your environment. right? You want to stand out, because when I'm searching for something, what am I looking for? Something that doesn't look like it belongs in nature, right? And it's easy if you're just in an emergency floating there, it's just the top of a wave. But if I'm scanning, go, what the heck is that debris over there? Oh my God, it's a real person. So you always want to take as much stuff as you can with you and clip it off and have it on you and make yourself readily apparent. All right, so I pulled out the radio, calling Mario to come save me. All right. And I think at the end here, Mario swims up and saves me, but I think I can move on. I think if I hit the button, it'll stop and I'll, let's see. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. So in 2015, now we're gonna fast forward. In 2015, Hurricane Joaquin came up the Florida coast and it sank the container ship El Faro. You guys remember that? Yeah. And all the crew, everyone died on that. I could talk for another 6 hours on El Faro. But the Coast Guard did an investigation and the hearings were held up in Jacksonville. Well, I had just retired from the military. I was living in Stewart at the time, my wife, and I said, oh my God, they're gonna have the hearings in Jacksonville. I've never been to an actual Coast Guard hearing. I'm gonna go. You know, what else should I do in my retirement? I'll go sit in the Coast Guard hearing. So I go there, I go to Jacksonville, and lo and behold, Captain Lordson, who was the head of the investigative board for the Marine Electric, was there as well. And so that's him on the left of me on the right. And Captain Lordson said, what the hell are you doing here? And I go, well, what are you doing here? He goes, well, this is like a repeat of the Marine Electric. And in many ways it was, because the El Faro was an old, rusty ship that should not have been in service. And after this investigation, the company that ran El Faro and several other vessels of that class retired them, sent them to the shipyard, scrapped them, because it was pointed out there was, I mean, I could go through the litany of things that were wrong. But it was fascinating to see Captain Lordson there, and also the investigation. I just want to touch on this to show you how rapidly things can go bad on you. The ship was leaving, El Faro was leaving to go to Puerto Rico, and it left out of Jacksonville, and it had two routes it could go. Either leave Jacksonville and go down along the coast of Florida, through the straits north of Cuba and down to Puerto Rico, or it could go out in the ocean and go down. The fastest route is to go out of Jacksonville, go out in the ocean, and stream straight to Puerto Rico. But at the time that they left, the Hurricane Joaquin was out there. And one of the first tenets of hurricane avoidance is you never cross the T, meaning for hurricanes coming up, you never go north of where it's headed. Because even if it goes left or right, if you're up in here, you don't know what to do. You always find a path that leads you parallel and away, underneath. You don't engage in the direction it's coming. But the captain left and he went out, and here's the path of the hurricane, because what the captain thought is that, well, at the time he left, the hurricane was heading north. But the hurricane turned and came back down, and that's where they collided. And people say, well, it's a fluke, it's unusual. It happens all the time. Hurricanes are steered by the upper level winds, and you can't just DR the hurricane. Oh, and you see it sometimes on simplified charts on the Weather Channel and commercial. It says, oh, here's where the hurricane's going to go. Well, that gap there, it can go anywhere within that zone that they draw. So it go here and go to, because there's so many inputs into the hurricane strength and motion, and it's complicated, but it's also simplistic. And I've sailed where there have been hurricanes, and I never went or took a route that would lead me north or of where that direction the moon was. Anyway, so the El Faro ran into the hurricane, but here's the interesting thing. This dashed line right here is the edge of tropical force winds emanating from the center of the hurricane, which is 34 to 49 knots. This dashed line is sustained winds of 50 to 63, and then inside of this is sustained hurricane force winds greater than 64 knots. The El Faro, this is what happened. They went from, well, this is bad, but it's survivable, to the ship is gonna sink within hours because the force of the wind causes the pressure to go up by a factor of 4. Meaning, if it's blowing 10 knots and then it goes to 20 knots, it's doubling the wind speed, but the force goes up by a factor of 4. And that's why people say, well, it's blowing 10 knots and now it's going to 20. Well, it's only doubling. How bad can it be? But if you're any of you sailors in here, all right, so you ever notice on the mainsail where it has the reef points? Are they equal? No, the first reef is like this, the second reef is like this, and the third reef is like leaving your handkerchief because it accounts for the fact that the force is going up by a factor of 4. And that's what happened to them. They got into sustained 64 knots and greater. Sea state went up to, I don't know, some ungodly amount. And that's what happened. The containers broke loose and they capsized and they sank. So physics comes into play, and you really, if you're the skipper, the master, the ship router, you gotta be on your toes. So it's interesting because I had long discussions with Captain Lauritsen, and here we were, 30, 40 years later, discussing the same kind of era. All right, so thank you for coming tonight. As we used to say in the Army, pending your questions and comments, this concludes my presentation. I'm really glad you came. I apologize for going over. No, thank you. Yes.
About the STCW training I did back
Yes.
in Seattle was, I think they originally founded it back in the 70s, so it was before this, but then like in 1995, there was some more convention, like it was more mandatory or what? how
Yes,
it
so-
changed with
So
the-
whenever we have a question,
Yes.
so that people on Zoom can hear it, if you would please restate it and then do the answer.
All right, the question is, very good question. The basic safety training that we do now is a result of a convention called STCW, which is Standards of Training and Certification for Watch Standards, which is an international treaty that's all maritime nations sign off to provide some consistency and continuity to the training of mariners. So regardless of what ship you're on, we're all going to do things the same so we can communicate, be safe, and not die. Consistent. For a while, those agreements were more of a paper convention. We're going to do this, and you're from Canada, okay, you take care of your guys, and I'll take care of mine. And then the Coast Guard realized, and other maritime nations realized, that it's got to be more hands-on. We actually have to get mariners in the water, deploying life rafts and putting immersion suits on and demonstrating and holding people accountable. So when you take the training, I had to flunk people sometimes. Can't get in a life raft, you don't pass.
It's hard to get in those.
It's very hard. And so you've done it.
And the fire training too, it's a fire element.
You have to do
Yeah.
firefighting,
Yep.
you have to do life rafts,
Great.
a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
First aid, the one that I really liked, which was interesting, they inserted it into, was personal responsibility, meaning you are responsible for following non-pollution laws. You are responsible for emptying trash properly. You cannot discharge sewer inside the territorial limit. And instead of putting it into the responsibility of someone else, it's like you will lose your license, and if you see someone else doing it, and you are as liable as that other person. So if the chief mate's pumping oil on the side and you see it, you have a responsibility to tell, and we will protect you if you turn them in, or report it, I should say. And that's helped tremendously. Nothing angers me more than cruise ships that throw their waste overboard, pump their sewage overboard. They're making millions of dollars a day, and they have the arrogance to dump stuff in the ocean. It makes me crazy. That's enough. Good question. No, that's all right.
It's
Very good.
good training. I haven't done it.
I'm glad to say that if you go out on a boat, or if you get a Coast Guard license, you have to do it. But if you're going to go sailing on someone's boat, going someplace, you should voluntarily take an STCW 7-day basic safety training course.
Yeah. And they only offer certain cities.
Yeah.
Seattle and
Right.
Florida maybe has one, yeah.
Yeah. yeah, you should do it. You'll learn a lot and you'll feel more confident and you'll be able to help other people. So, okay, yeah, thank you for asking. Other question? Yes.
Has all the work diving that you've done impacted your ability to enjoy fun diving? Do you want to give it to us?
That's an excellent. So, yes, sorry, thank you. So I go recreational diving now. I go out with Horizon Divers. I love them. Dan runs an awesome operation, and I've tried other groups, but I always go back to them. Anyway, he has a great boat, great captains, but to answer your question, when I get on the boat, I got this Navy diver mentality. So, I'm checking my gear, I'm doing checks, not pretending, that's the only way I know how to dive. And when I do it, what I get enjoyment out of is the planning, the execution, the completion of, I'm gonna go dive on Monday, this is the weather, this is where we're going, this is where I'm gonna go on the Spiegel Grove, this is how I'm gonna, do my bottom time and clean my gear and re-provision. And after the whole evolution is done, that's when I get the aha moment. And I know some people go, oh, I like the fish and the groupers and blah, 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 blah. And I think that's great. I mean, wildlife is wonderful, but the satisfaction I get is the execution of the whole, showing up on time, loading my gear, not being that person who runs back to their car going, oh my God, I left my basket at home.
You're on the spare
So anyway, definitely the answers, yeah.
Are you CCR or open circuit when you're diving?
I just dive open circuit scuba, nitrox.
No.
No tech. It's too much for me at this point in my life. I admire it. I watch them and I go, wow, that's pretty cool stuff. But it's beyond what I feel comfortable doing. Though I did go diving last year with a person that's in this room who had a scooter, and she convinced me to buy a scooter. So I do like the scooter, and I've upgraded to that. Thank you. Yes.
What for the most part killed the people on the flight? They were buckled in, it wasn't.
It was
Repeat
the impact.
Repeat the question.
Oh, yes, thank you. What caused the people on the Air Florida Flight 90 to die? It was the impact, so that the G forces of this plane, massive plane, first hitting the bridge, impacting the water, and then the water is so cold that they all probably went into shock and panic. I mean, you're in this plane, you're expecting to be this way, suddenly you're dropping, the plane splits apart, freezing water comes in, it's all over. I mean, it's just like, you don't have any time to react. So the people that did survive were at the junction where the tail and the fuselage broke apart, and one of the stewardesses, flight attendants, floated to the surface. And that's where the other people came out. And luckily, and you can see videos of this on YouTube. One of the someone on shore jumped in the water and helped someone out. Park Service helicopter came and pulled someone to the shore. So the people that survived were just miraculously at the place where the plane broke open and they got out. When I was a diver, we had to go through dunker training where you get a helicopter and it flips over and sinks in the pool, and you're blindfolded and you have to get out, and the pool's not warm, but it's not as cold as the ocean. It's tolerable. But you're always taught, to hold on when you're level and you can see, hold on to something for your frame of reference and go, okay, the exit is there. So no matter where as the thing flips over, if you're holding on and the exit is that direction, no matter what orientation the helicopter fuselage takes, I'm going to go that direction. So it really helps you maintain you don't get vertigo. If you just sit there and the plane flips over, then you're like, oh God, how do I get out of here? So and you can apply this, flying commercially. What do they always tell you? Look for the nearest exit. It might not be in front of you. It might be behind you. And I don't fly a lot now, but I used to always look around. Two exits, two exits. Everyone else is, on their phones, Facebook. But, I'm always looking for the exits, right? And the other thing that you can inculcate into your brain is that situational awareness of paying attention to what's going on. whether you're on an airplane or in your car or walking through the mall, be aware of your surroundings. And if you start doing that, you'll be aware of how many people go through the day kind of clueless as to who's around them, what's going on, because you might have to react. You might see, I hate to use mass shooting things, but you might see someone in a mall with a backpack and he's doesn't look, right. And you go, that guy's look suspicious. I'm gonna tell the security guard instead of just like, oh, look, I'm gonna go into the bar and you don't have to be anal compulsive, but I served in, one of the things I did in the Army, for a year I served in combat in Iraq, worked with the Navy and the Air Force doing explosive ordnance work, IEDs that go off, and you really learn to pay attention and to pick up on what's going on around you. Because the IEDs that were blowing and killing troops were put in bicycles, under the underpasses, buried all over the place. And you had to look at stuff and go, does that look normal? And that doesn't look normal. And then investigate. And maybe it's nothing, but it teaches you to always be inquisitive about your environment. And if you see something that doesn't seem to make sense, go check it out. But a lot of people in society is the herd mentality, So I'm just gonna do what Fred's doing and off we go. But diving teaches you to be intuitive, right? Check your pressure, check your air, check the bodies, check the current. You're always doing that, iterative cycle. And
Think about what ifs too.
and what ifs? What ifs? And when I stood bridge watches, hours and hours of bridge watches, we always rehearsed. What happens right now if I lose rudder failure? What if I have rudder failure? I lose steering. What happens right now if I have a fire in the engine? What happens right now if a thunderstorm comes in? I lose my radar. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So you're not paralyzed. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I'm done.
I did have one question over Zoom
Yes.
from Laura. She wanted to know if you'd heard about the fisherman in Iceland who survived the boat sinking.
No.
No.
Is this recently?
I think it may have been recent. I'll send you.
I don't. I know of cases where people have been in a submerged boat. There was some guy that lived for 3 days in it, but I don't know of the specific.
Hence the bandmass behind you.
Oh,
That was on the individual that you're talking about was trapped, and they used Mythbusters came in and they actually filmed an episode, and they used a helmet similar to that
to get him out. Yeah, so that's great, because once you put the hat on and air's going through it, you don't have to do anything. Yes.
Well,
Right.
thank you so much, Mike,
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Yeah.
That was amazing. We are going to do a year-long membership for the museum.
Actually, he's already a member. We're extending it another year.
Until the end of June next year, and we're also going to send you home with this.
Great, awesome.
Oh, nice.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, so thank
All
you
right.
again. Thank you for everyone who came.
Thank you.